Welcome to another episode of The Weird Way. I am excited for today. I've just been having the most delicious conversation here with Jessicka Ann. She's an energetics trainer, a business coach, and someone I've been really excited to have on because she, like myself, is a little bit weird, a little bit strange, and just before we jumped on here, we're talking about delusion and if we're actually delusional ourselves, and I guess who really knows in this reality, but it's something we've been exploring. So Jessicka, absolute pleasure to have you here. It's felt fun and I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. I felt like we could have definitely made the pre-show conversation a whole podcast.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll find our way back there and probably explore a few different other realms as well. And it feels like there's a lot of energy here for us to play with and explore.
Awesome.
So Jessicka, before we began, you said the word entrepreneurial alchemy.
Yes.
And that's what you're playing with right now.
That's what I have been playing with. So when Dean goes, how would you like me to introduce you? And I'm like, well, I'm an energetics trainer. That part has remained kind of static. I do have my own, when I say static, evolving, but that seems to be a consistent thread. I have my own certification program, which is through the Artmeisia Energetics Academy. And the other part of me that's been really, I guess, evolving and emerging is I have done a lot of work with business energetics, coaching people in business. And I've realized that if somebody come to me thinking that I was your standard business coach, like we're going to talk about strategy and how many times a day you should be posting on Instagram, and this is, the revenue model for your business, like I can do that stuff. Like I've got the grounding in all of that, but it's really not the juice that I deliver. And it's also not what tends to happen in my field. Like people will come to me like, oh, I need to work on X, and the next thing it's just like this things tend to expand and open. So, and I honoured that. Like my primary service is to the mystery, is to magic. So it would be deceptive of me to pretend that I am your standard suit and tie business coach.
And if you'd listen to this, I've got Jess beside me and she is not in a suit and a tie, very much holding the energetics of a witch right here, and that is something I deeply appreciate. And one of the things like about this podcast is that a big part of why I'm hosting it, why I wanted people like yourself on, is it's not the normal path that people get to where they're an energetics trainer, they're entrepreneurial alchemy, that's their jam. And when I hear that, it feels like there's been quite a journey to actually get there, to get to a point where it's like, oh, I'm working with the mystery and claiming that fully. And I know I've had conversations, maybe not on here, but with a lot of women around even the witch wound and really owning that part of themselves. And I feel like to actually be able to hold yourself in that, there's been quite a journey to anchor that in. And I'm curious how you ended up into this point where you are the full-blown witch who's teaching that, who's training others, who's bringing it to business and actually holding that in a grounded way.
So this is where I kind of go, get your popcorn, Oliver Twist. We're going way back.
Oh, I wish I brought some.
So it's funny, like I think, have you ever seen that Steve Jobs commencement speech where he talks about the idea that you only ever connect the dots looking backwards?
Yeah.
I periodically re-listen to that because I'm a big Steve Jobs nerd. But the reason I reference that is because when I do look back on my life, I think there was always seeds. And if you are someone that is interested in magic, chances are if you follow Dean, you probably are. Yeah. But there's often this idea of, they talk about like the true will and this ultimate self that you're here to realize in this lifetime. And, whether or not that is in service to something of a divinity or service to your true self, whatever it is that you align with. That's up for debate. We can probably talk about that shortly. But I think when I look back on who I have been and what has always called to me, there has always been this element of the dark and magic. I was a big Tim Burton fan as a kid, like crazy Tim Burton fan. Like, my friends that come over, it's like, what movie do you want to watch? Do you want to watch, Barbie? But no, we're going to watch Nightmare Before Christmas and it's going to be great. And so right from a really young age, I loved Batman, and I think that's hilarious as well now when I think about the fact that I dress as the dark to serve the light. I'm like, it was just Batman. He was there the whole time. He was just an archetype for who I am. So I think from a very young age, there was always this appetite for things that were taboo or unorthodox. So that was always a thread. And this curiosity around magic. And I think as children, we naturally have that sensitivity or attunement to magic. And I think I had a few spooky experiences as a kid that made me sort of tune that down or turn that off. And as a young adult, reconnecting with that more, so I was a goth at high school.
Not surprised.
It's just, it cycles, so it's just, for me, I remember when that really turned on, I'd been bullied profusely at primary school, picked on for being a nerd and wearing glasses and being a chubby kid. So it was just high school, I'm going to fit in. I'm going to do everything that I possibly need to fit in and keep my head down. And that lasted all of 12 months. And then I became a goth after seeing this Marilyn Manson video. And I remember now I have a language for this, but I just remember how much Eros was pumping through my system when I first saw that man. I was like, whatever he has, I want that. There was just a piece that he was holding. And I'm like, yes, that is aligned with who I am. So Marilyn Manson and the Gothic subculture acted as a really big initiatory pathway for me to access a lot of different information. So here I am, 14, 15, learning about Aleister Crowley, learning about Marcus de Sade, learning about all of this debauchery and, taboo topics and magic and the occult, all of these things. So in between kind of studying whatever, listening to black metal and researching these things on the internet. So that was my initiation as a youth, and then decided that, well, what am I going to do with that as a career? So that kind of got put by the wayside again. I'm like, all right, I'm going to be serious, and I'm going to do things in the real world. And I just feel like the things that we're meant to do find their way back to us. My first serious boyfriend, his mum was a clairvoyant. And, so she was introducing me to a lot of things to do with, extrasensory perception. She took me to my first sweat lodge. So, here I am, 21, sitting in a sweat lodge with, middle-aged women, doing all these shamanic processes. And I'm just like, okay, this is interesting. And again, it was just this consistent thread coming back to this magic, to this mystery, to these pieces that were wanting to come through me. And I had my first, serious mentor. I met her when I was about 15. And she said to me then, she goes, you're going to be a healer. She goes, it's just, in your energy there is this, you have a gift. And, as a 15-year-old person, I'm like, yeah, whatever, sure. And because I was super, that's the other part of me too. If you think about a lot of, a lot of witchy people or intuitive people, you generally associate them with, Glastonbury and Stonehenge and a lot of long flowing dresses and just go with the flow. And whereas I'm actually really intellectual. So for me, I'm just I've come from this background of I want scientific evidence. I want it to make sense. I want to be able to my brain is one of my strongest senses. So for me, it was just okay, yeah, maybe I'm going to be a healer, but it needs to make sense to me. It needs to, if I can't, my brain can't get behind it, I'm not interested. So that was kind of my 20s, was this kind of wrestling with my own version of spirituality. In the meantime, I was I had a eating disorder in my late teens, early 20s, which essentially led me down the path of the fitness industry, because I was I ended up nearly hospitalized, had my first nervous breakdown, all those kind of things, intense things. And I was like, if I can just save one person to not have to go through this. So that was fitness for me. It was just this is the first time I felt like I had agency in my body when I first was recovering. And so I'm going down this path of getting super keen on understanding the body. So it's just I want to understand the mechanics of this. I want to be able to be the best version of myself that I can to bring this fully to the people I'm working with. And it was during this period that I met my late husband. And so fitness was a big thing. Nutrition was the next thing, because the other way that my brain works is it's maps and models.
Yeah.
It's nothing exists in a vacuum. So it's okay, so if this is happening here, what is influencing that's creating it? So I'm just right, fitness, I'm going to now learn about nutrition. And then the next thing was mindset. I'm just right, so these are the 3 pillars that are influencing people. So I'm working away on this. And meanwhile, my late husband and I, our relationship's getting along, we got engaged, and then he ended up diagnosed with terminal cancer. And that was such a big, a handbrake on everything that I thought we were creating together, let alone what I was creating. And then that journey of his experience of that illness and being alongside him as his carer and caring for his 2 children, it was a really big test on my own spirituality. I'd had experiences in the past of manifesting things. I'd been doing that pretty naturally since I was quite young. there was a whole chapter in my life I kind of left out in this story. But yeah, so I had corporate experience and all that stuff in amongst why I found personal training. But this experience of him getting sick really challenged my idea of fate and what was true and what was not and why I was led there. And seeing him, and, you know, he was a typical Aussie guy. Like, I grew up in the country. Like, it's hilarious when I think about the people that I've ended up with. They would, like, you know, I always thought I was going to be with some metalhead guy, but it's like they're always these Aussie tradies. Anyway, so typical Aussie tradie, Sparky from Adelaide. And yeah, and just seeing his complete 180 with his spiritual journey, like some of the things that I was able to support him with, connecting with, dealing with his, I guess, mortality in the face of this illness. So, and just seeing his devotion to leaning into knowing himself so fully. And at the time of his passing, I was actually able to support, like, in a doula kind of role to help support him crossing over. And ever since that experience of the final days of his life, like, that was another initiation portal for me to understand that there are realms that exist beyond the physical. Like, he was sending me communications of how I would experience him from the other side. And some of the prophetic things that he said even in those final days. So I'm like, clearly there is all these hunches and all these curiosities I've had about the spiritual realm. It's quite tangibly physical. Like, I have seen this, I've experienced this with my late husband. And so from there, it was just that piece of, like, being his carer, being a stepmom for the last however long. When he passed away and the children went to live with their biological mum, it was like, okay, well, who am I? So that was like a big question around, like, all right, what am I here for? So I sort of threw myself back into my PT business, but it was never the same. There was like this extra dimension of, like, I would be attracting people in, and it would never just be like, oh, I'm just here to lose weight and get fit. There would be other things that I would be coaching them through. It would be like, you know, people would come to me and they would be wrestling with big things. So the next thing I'm like, well, if this is what I'm going to keep pulling into my field, I've got to equip myself. Like, there's clearly a reason these people keep coming to me. And that was when, like, I started to come a little bit more out of the closet with the energetic side of things, because I was getting a lot of people with chronic injuries, and what I would find is I would work with them energetically, emotionally, and physically, and they would have these miraculous turnarounds. Like, I had this woman that couldn't walk from one end of her house to the other, and I would do these sessions with her that were, like, again, completely unorthodox. Like, where's your evidence procedure for this? I'm like, bloody no, I'm following my intuition. But she walks for kilometres now. Like, you know, she's back. I think my last Instagram post I think I saw from her, she was, like, taking up dancing. You know, so there was this thread around, okay, what's been the biggest shift for me? Like, it's when I incorporate this energy piece. When I'm working with people with energy, suddenly there's these, like, huge shifts in what they're experiencing. And again, looking back, I think about how I used to do program design. It was all very intuitive. Like, I'd be reading people's bodies, but I didn't have language for that. It was just intuitive. So the intellectual side of me is like, right, I've got to get better at being able to explain this. Because I think, you know, there's a lot of people that are really great at just trusting. I've never been one of those people. And it kind of needs someone to be able to give me something to hang on to enough that I can kind of let go. And I'm like, well, if I'm like this, I can't be the only one. And then I was finding more and more people are just like, I want more of this side. I want more of this connection. I've had experience of it. However, I can't trust it enough. I can't trust myself enough with it. And that was the thing that I kept refining and getting curious about. And that was eventually what led to me creating the metatonic completion method, which is the modality that I now teach. And that is essentially the bridge between that safety in the mind to be in the body, and then safety in the body to move with spirit. So that was huge, and that was obviously the culmination of lots and lots of training, getting better at what I was doing. And along all of that, I think those things that potentially do hold you back are the things that come up for resolution. So, you know, I've definitely had my face off with a witch wound, and like more than once. It's like I've had at least three past life regressions where I've been persecuted for practicing magic. And then since, like, those ideas of what's safe in society now, it's like, you know, we're really lucky that you and I are sitting here publicly stating that we practice magic. But, you know, this is still stuff on a somatic level you would have been burned for. So I feel that that's something that cycles back around periodically. And then also embracing this shamanic lineage through the fact that I have Aboriginal heritage, which is someone that presents white, has lived most of their life white. but has Aboriginal ancestors that come and help when I'm doing healing and, you know, work like that. It's just like, oh, how do I reconcile that as a white woman? So there has been these paces of getting out of my own way. It's like, you know, and the more that I'm willing to lean into that, the more I have found that it's, if nothing else, a beautiful permission piece for the people around me. So yeah, that's a pretty long-winded / abridged also version.
I really, really enjoy so much of this. And like for myself, I come from an engineering background. So I feel you in wanting to know and wanting to have that framework where it feels like, oh, if I do this, this will happen. And there's an element where we never know, but there's an element of like, oh, that framework which provides a guideline perhaps where we can navigate in that. And I'm curious with you within that, because when I hear that and the journey you went on, you started quite young, 14, 15, where you started learning about magic and all of this. And I'm wondering at that point, your belief systems around the world in regards to maybe a great higher power and then the experience with your late husband, was there a shift in perspectives of connecting to something? You said you could now tune more deeply into the next realm or know that there was more. Before that experience, was there a certain belief system you had about greater power or something that's shifted over time, or was that always something that was there in the undercurrents?
So the other piece that I didn't mention this time when I told my story, it's so funny because I feel like there's so much shit that has happened to me in 34 years. I'm like, talk to me on a different day, you're probably going to get a different version.
Great. I like that. We can do another one.
I'm just like, man, this is like, you know, everyone's like, when are you going to write a book? I'm like, mate, I don't have enough time. But in terms of my dad, again, you know, how you say you date your parents. My dad was an Aussie bloke and he basically sustained an injury when I was about 8 or 9 where he injured his back. And in terms of actually looking to create relief for that back pain, he started practicing yoga. And, you know, being from regional Victoria, practicing yoga in the 90s, it wasn't exactly a common thing. It wasn't like there was just yoga studios around every corner. So Dad is exploring yoga and as a result, opening more to his alternative spirituality. And being that, you know, the mates that he plays golf with and has beers with aren't really going to be the people that are open to talking about chakras who copped those conversations. It was me. So Dad's sitting there teaching me about these philosophies that he's gaining from Eastern, you know, esoteric traditions essentially. And so therefore for me, like I was always this sense of like, okay, there's these things that exist beyond the physical, you know. So that Dad taking me off to the Theosophical Society as a young person and having those, I guess, those versions of reality challenged really young was really powerful. It was just like, okay, so there's this whole other concept of how the world works. And then, yeah, when I was about 14, 15, I think it was just really wanting to understand like the anatomy of belief. So like I've got my sun and my Jupiter are conjunct in the 9th house and it's in Gemini. So the idea of spirituality and belief has always just been something that I'm so super curious about. And I just have always had a sense of these things that exist beyond the physical. And at various points in my life, that has taken on different tones. And I think that, you know, I've been reading a lot of Nick Cave recently and his belief or his ideas around that really resonate with me. It's just the idea of that religion is the experience of seeking. And I think that for me is probably one of the things that has served me the most.
I really enjoy that sentence. Religion is the experience of seeking. And when I look back at, well, your path, my own, like so much of that has been seeking something more, seeking something greater. For me, it's always been like story is such a pivotal point. What's the greater story playing out? How do I fit within the story of life? And like when I hear your story about going through the golf, connecting to Marilyn Manson and going through that and then going into the fitness industry, there's some corporate things. There was different stories playing out within your life. And I think a lot of us here who've, you know, looking to become more of who we are, we often slot into different stages of our life where there's a specific story playing out. Maybe I become the golf. Maybe I become, for me, it was the hippie flow boy. That was a big part. Maybe if I look back, I'd laugh at who I was, but it was funny and enjoyable. And like we're looking for that story, which actually anchors us into who we are. And like reflecting for me, it's similar. Like I can see threads that were aligned throughout my life, little seeds that were planted. And looking back, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like I was a couple degrees off when I was a spiritual flow boy. That was like closer than what I was before that, because before that I was the stoner engineer, and that truly wasn't me. But that was like, oh, the engineer, I still love some of that, like the scientific method, explore and begin to know and create and frame and create structure. I've loved that. I love that part of me. But it wasn't the engineer that I loved, it was them qualities. The spiritual flow boy, he was connected to God and things that I'd never connected to. And then learning that, oh, that's not quite it. And then connecting like you did to, you said something, fronting the light with the dark, or something along them lines. And that was a quote I really loved, because people can consider a lot of magic to be dark and gritty, and then they forget, or it's not shown that it's actually serving the light, serving something greater. And I think that like is another identity which we can slot into, and then through all of it, it's really learning, who are we at the core of that? Who is it, Jessicka? Who is that? Who is Dean? And how do we belong to a greater story than ourselves?
I love that. And I think the different characters and being able to experience yourself through the story, I think, because that's the other thing too, where I feel that's a bit of a cosmic joke about when we get too married to a specific version of who we are. I remember I was at a retreat once and we all sat around in a circle, and it was like this intuitive exercise where we had to drop in and ask what our shadow was. And mine was my light. So it was this idea of I had become so married to showing up in this, I guess, expression of the dark and serving these places that people don't want to look and don't want to see, that I had disowned that I'm also light. So it's just that kind of homecoming around those qualities. So I think, yeah, just that multidimensional nature of who we are at our core and the roles that we're playing within that greater story.
And I think that touches on the purpose of integration, the middle path. I feel, you know, we can have these debates, or it's yin or yang, light or dark, and it's like, actually we're here for it all. We're here to walk the middle path between each of them stories and be able to hold both pillars. Like that's the thing about the great work. It's about bringing them opposites together, so no longer we need the external representation of what we don't like. No longer do we need, like if we're having money troubles, we're no longer afraid of scarcity. We can embrace that, move it through our body so we can actually change that situation. We can begin to change our reality by embracing the things that we don't want and accepting them as part of reality.
Yeah, definitely. So that expanded holding capacity, because you accept all of it. Yeah, rather than being polarized and pushing it away.
In that, on the journey, I'm curious, what were some of the more polarizing moments which was like, oh, that's hard for me to embrace? Like there was the shadow of the light, and I'm sure there's many moments where it's like, oh, I don't know if I can embrace that paradox or the polarity of that.
It's funny when the business piece landed for me, because I was essentially marketing myself at the time as an energetics and embodiment coach. It's like, this is the work that I'm here to do. That's my role. And I attracted this client, and all the work we kept doing together, like it was just, shit was popping off in his business. Like, you know, I'm just landing these opportunities I've never landed before. I'm making more money. And like, so he started calling me his business coach, and it used to trigger the shit out of me. And like, but then I would stand back and have a look at all the results of the people I was working with. And it was just like this unanimous expansion in their business. And I'm just like, because having had that corporate context of like, you know, coming from working with KPIs and doing sales and managing high performance teams, and it's always like super masculine, rigid. And I'd scaled a successful business in the past doing all the really super masculine push kind of stuff. And I was just like, I'm not a business coach. Just like looking around, and it's like, oh, okay, apparently this is beneficial for people's businesses. Sure enough, integrated the paradox of this idea of like, yes, I am here for the energy and the embodiment and the magic, and it's also about business. And then my business just took this exponential upturn. I'm like, okay, so there you go. Like integrate the paradox. So that was a huge one.
It's really that reclamation I'm feeling of that past version of yourself. And like when I consider the journey, I see most people, we have an aversion to a certain point in our lives. We're like, no, that's no longer me. For me, it was like the engineer. I was like, no, I'm not an engineer anymore. I'm spiritual. I don't care about that world, and I don't want anything to do with it, because I was depressed and I was anxious while I was there, and I hated my life. And so I rejected all of that, associating that with where I was in my life. Yet a big part lately has been, how can I reclaim my inner engineer. And it's not so much about like what I do as an engineer, but it's about the design, about the structure in my life that I get to build into it, and actually being like, oh, I enjoy structure. I enjoy having things where I can reflect and frame my work, frame how I can move forward, create structure in my goals and all of that. So I know, oh, I'm taking the right step, instead of being like, oh, I'm just in my flow, I'm doing all that. But there's that inner engineer, which is more of my masculine. It's like, yo, you are an engineer. You're a big nerd for numbers. Like, you love that. Stop denying that. And I was like, oh, I was so afraid, because I was like, if I embrace my engineer, it means I've got to go back and be an engineer. I've got to go back to that world. And, you know, I'll be working in corporate. I'll have to wear a suit and a tie all the time, which I love, but I don't want to do it in a business setting in that way. And to actually be like, oh, that's okay. I could be an engineer, but I choose not to.
As soon as you actually said to me, because I didn't realize you'd come from an engineering background, I'm like, oh, that explains so much of like how I feel your energy. I'm like, I feel that for you. And I'm just like, that is epic. Like, as soon as I heard you actually verbalize it, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. This piece here that I feel. Yeah. And yeah, it is. It feels very native to you. Yeah. And I think that those things we do find our way into for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of James Hillman's work. Are you familiar?
No, I'm not.
He, like, one of his main concept is the acorn into the oak tree. So the soul is the, you know, inner acorn, and it develops into the oak tree, and it knows it's going to be the oak tree. But there's that shell around it, and it's like, oh, I don't want to crack open and expand because I'm afraid that will kill me. I'm afraid it will change. And like, I think we're multiple acorns, and there's bigger acorns, and we continue to grow and crack and all of that. But one of the things that I've learned is in his work, he speaks to this, of that there's things throughout our life that call to us really strongly, and we can ignore them, we can disown them, we can reject them. But regardless of what we do, they come back into our field, and our soul gave us some experiences for that purpose. And so he speaks about trauma in this way of like, most of our traumatic incidences, our soul called for to give us a gift. Like, one of my beliefs is the garden of our gifts grow in our sacred wound. So the wound that most of us experience, there's a gift in there when we heal that, and we can give it back to people. And throughout our lives, we can look at any experience and have it as a negative, or be like, oh, I didn't like that, but what's the gold we can take from that? For me, learning, oh, I can take gold from my engineering days and bring it into this world to share with people. How to structure life, how to be more direct, how to like own that masculine element where we are designing life. Like, that's a pillar of my work, to design your life. I talk about soul and all of that, but soul needs structure to come through. It needs a container. Otherwise, we're just flailing around in the chaos.
There's seasons, seasons of flailing around in the chaos.
Oh, the void. Let us stay in the dark and just live in here. No one see me. Let me hide down here. I enjoy that far too much.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that can be quite addictive. And yeah, it's just being able to, and I think, like you say, the acorn knows it's going to be an oak tree, so inevitably those seasons end. And I've been really playing with that idea of fate versus free will more and more. I think it's interesting. I think there is like a framework that I've been playing with around how that manifests. And I think that there is like a utility to being open to both.
I'd love to explore this. So for me, I've very big on the Greek word daemon, if you're familiar, like the guardian angel that kind of speaks to us in dreams, in intuition, and guides our path. And I'm curious where you're landing in fate versus free will, and how that, because I think that is a big conversation that, like, I myself question that. I'm still debating that within myself of, oh, I do believe I have free will, and I do believe I have fate. And I believe there's a paradox of that, of I can accept my path or reject it, but there's also a path for me. And my free will is to choose that or not. And that's generally where I land, but I'm also curious.
It's one of those ones where literally where you were talking about the paradox, and I think utility of belief is a big one for me. Like, I think with any idea, modality, tool, concept you're playing with, my frame that I'm always looking through is this enhancing choice or reducing it? So that's where for me I don't try to get too rigid with the free will versus fate piece, because ironically, you like, yes, we're 100% free will. This is the path, and this is how you will have on your lap land millions of evidence pieces around fate, just like it will challenge those places where you are holding too tightly. And it's amusing to me. I think probably one of the ideas or concepts that I have loved the most recently is this idea that there is core pieces that our soul has enrolled to experience in this lifetime. It's like, yes, I will develop and grow here, and I will experience X and I'll experience Y. And I think the journey that you take to set experiences is the free will part. Which I think, because I'm an astrology nut, like I absolutely love astrology, and I think if you take someone's astrological chart and you can basically read them as a person without even having ever met them, I think, well, yeah, there is clear evidence here that there is something fated. However, the expression that takes, like, I can't tell you, okay, somebody has got a lot of Sagittarius. Maybe they're a speaker, maybe they're a teacher, maybe they're a philosopher, maybe they just travel a lot. But there is going to be one of those four in their life, if not a combination of them.
I like that framework. For me, I'm always considering the deeper story at play. So the undercurrents of life is how I generally look at this. Like, what's the deeper story playing out? And it feels very similar in, like, there's a deeper story for the soul to experience, but the surface level of how that looks, that's going to change. Sometimes it might be raging waters. Sometimes it'll be calm. It could be the ocean, whatever that looks like. But underneath, there's a deep layer of, this is what they're here to experience. This is what part of their life is going to represent.
Definitely. I think there is that blueprint piece around, the expression and potentially the lessons or the evolution or what we're refining. If you think about the idea of the concept of like an eternal soul, that each time we're reincarnated on this plane, there are specific things that we have desired to experience or refine or contribute.
One of the paradoxes I like to play with is if I'm an eternal soul or not, because there's part of me that's like, if I'm an eternal soul, I could get lazy in this life. So I'm like, maybe I'll just do it next lifetime, and to play with that of, no, I need to like get real and be like, this could be my only life as well, and actually live as if that is so. And is there a way you play with that paradox yourself?
I had this wild experience, and it was one of those ones where, as you were sharing, I'm like, is this alive? I'm like, apparently it's alive.
Yes.
So one of those ones where it comes up, you're just like, oh, okay, yep, okay, we're going here. I had a journey with a grandmother medicine, and I was sitting there, and I actually had this experience of my oversoul thanking the cosmos for gifting them me. It's like, I'm really appreciative that you have given us chance to work with Jessicka in this lifetime. And it was such an interesting experience to have like this almost like connection to a cosmic conversation about me being utilized as a vehicle. Like all the attributes that my oversoul acknowledged in me as a persona and as a personality.
What landed for you after that experience, and how was the integration of that?
That journey was such an interesting one. It was just a piece around that idea. I think it was affirming some things that I had suspected. I think it's just that idea of, because I've had so many insights, and like anyone that's ever done any form of medicine or psychedelics, depending on how you relate to it, like often you'll get these profound insights and you'll be like, I have cracked the code, my friends. And then you'll come back and then you'll be like trying to explain it to someone, and it just sounds really lame. So for me, I was just like, okay, so this fits into, like, there seems to be a continual narrative thread with different experiences I've had. Like this idea that, and my earliest hypothesis of the nature of time was it's like a vinyl record. It's like, we are essentially like our consciousness is just the needle in the groove. So, all of time has already occurred, all of time, past, present, future, it's all here. And we're just experiencing it like that needle in the groove of the record going around. But each time that we're experiencing, like our consciousness is going around those grooves, we get to choose the flavor of it. So it's just like there's, myriad versions of Dean and Jess sitting on this couch having a conversation, but each of them would have had a different flavor of experience to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, it was just like that idea of, like my oversoul being the needle in the groove, and I'm just this specific flavor for this iteration.
And so when you're speaking to that idea that, there's multiple iterations of us here having this conversation, you're speaking into a multiverse universe, yes.
Yes, so there's like where my reference kind of jumps then into quantum entanglement and, quantum physics, because that to me also, when I learned about that, like my intellectual brain just went, oh, okay, that makes sense. Now that also gives me another framework too. And that's where when I speak to manifestation, I often think about that concept of selecting reality. Yeah. It's like you are aligning yourself with a version where that's real.
Yeah, I love to think of that. Like I call it timeline jumping, and just to play with this, like some of the small things I do to actually be like, oh, how can I jump timelines? How can I change this reality in a small, subtle way and see what changes? Like if I'm bored, and this is generally when I'm bored and I'm in the shops or I'm doing something different, I'm like, what wouldn't I buy today? And what can I buy? Because that changes reality in a small and subtle way. But if we make enough changes over time in that way, it changes who we are on a fundamental level. And one of my traps is feeling like, oh, I need to burn down my world to create a new one. And being like Phoenix from the ashes. And I've done that multiple times. And it's like, oh, things aren't going the way I want. Fuck it all. I'll destroy it and come back. And to learn that we can shift timelines subtly over time and actually take small actions that create big change. And there's a way where we can do that so it doesn't burn down the world. It doesn't destroy everything. And that for me is such an integration piece where there's so much more growth in that, because it's easy in a way to burn it all down because then we burn down our identity.
Definitely.
But it's hard to integrate a new identity into our current life.
Yes. That's it. And, typically people that are, high performing, that have got that experience of desire for growth, that cycle of build and burn is super, super common. And you're right, it's that piece around when you have that knowing that this current iteration, this current version is not it. It's like, this is not alive, this is not working. That desire to just set fire to it, I think that's when that kind of gets to a peak. It's just like, I want to kill it all. It's like it's not me anymore. And being able to channel that energy, as you say, into the direction that you're moving to without, that Kali energy of just to the ground.
Yeah, and like this for me is one of the integration of the paradoxes. I was having a conversation the other day, and to swing between polarities is kind of fun. It's like, one extreme to the other. And like I've done this so many times. My thing is when I start to get overwhelmed, when work's too much, when business is too much, I'm like, what would it be like if I just sold everything and went and lived in the woods? Like that is when I know I've been too far in and I need to take a step back. And how I do that is like 4 days out on the land, or maybe I'll fast, I'll do something to reset. Because really that's what I'm needing. But my mind is telling me, just burn it all. Burn, let it all go. And that point where it's like, oh, how can I meet this and meet in the middle? And that, once again, is coming back to that middle path that I think is so important.
I think the other thing too, if we think about the mind, it's like it's a problem-solving machine. It's just like, we need to get out of here. What's the fastest way? It's just like, this is the fastest path. It's just like, great, good problem-solving. However, sustainability-wise, questionable. Yeah. So that's where it's just like, okay, honoring that impulse, because like one of the things that I teach in my certification is this idea that when we're relating with energy through the felt sense, it's sensation, then it's feeling, then it's behavior, of the thought, then behavior. So we're getting this sensational energetic impulse, be it internal, external, that something needs to shift. So then that's going to be translated through the feelings, maybe through frustration, bitterness, overwhelm, whatever it may be. And then the thoughts are then simply responding to those stimuli. And the thoughts are essentially what we have accessed on repeat. It's like we're accessing all of our previous experience and data through the mind. So, so what was the filing system? What did we have available to us last time that we felt this? Oh, that's right, we burnt everything down. That was very effective. Here we go.
Very reaction-based.
Yes. So it's just like, okay, so if I can honor that there is this sensational activation of energy through the felt sense, what is the actual sensation I'm feeling? Can we come back to that? It's like, oh, okay, this is energy moving away. Can I actually honor that? As you say, maybe through a less destructive or extreme measure.
And this is where, for me, that my engineer loves coming in, because there's a problem. But if I break that down, if I get more specific, maybe there's a desire in there. Like when I work with people in relationships, it's like, oh, I feel trapped, so I need to leave this person. And that's been something that's come up. And I'm like, cool, yes, honor that. That's what you're feeling right now. And also check in. Is it that you're desiring more freedom? Is you're desiring more space to be by yourself? Is there another desire that's not being met? And actually acknowledge that rather than, oh, everything's done. And when we actually begin to look at this, it's like, oh, right, I get this. There's something here. And that's probably harder, because it's like, then I need a conversation. Then I need to be vulnerable and be like, hey, I have a desire that, maybe you take me out on a date. Maybe it's we experiment. Maybe it's to explore. Maybe it's to, hey, I need more space. And that one can be edgy for people.
I've heard that referred to as the sixth love language, space.
I feel like that must be around near the seventh one, where it's comfortable silence.
Oh, yeah. As an introvert, I love the seventh one.
Yeah. When I can feel that and my body's just relaxed with someone and we're just sitting there, it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're my kind of human. There's no need for me to perform or to entertain you. Yeah.
Just space. Maybe we read together. Maybe we're just...
I describe myself as someone with a cat-like personality. It's like, if I like you, sometimes I just need to be in the same room. Don't touch me. Don't talk to me. I'm just here.
God, I've never identified with a cat so strongly. I've had an aversion to cat. Now I know why. It just helped me integrate my cat of just being like, I want to be in the same room as people, but I don't want any... God, I'm a cat. Great to know.
Yeah, it's just, again, like that's, I think, been an edge for me to integrate too, because I can love the people, but then I need no people. It's like, it is very cat-like. It's just like, I'm going to go and do my thing and I'm going to go stalk my goals or whatever it is, but then, I'm always there if you need me. Like, I think that was like, my childhood cat was like that. So, when you were sick, she would just not leave your side, but then you were better, she'd be like, okay, you're on your own, I'm out.
I'm curious with that, because this is probably a tangent to this, and I love tangents, so this is where we're going. But walking the path you have, there's probably been times where you felt more alone or solitude from community and didn't really have that part where you maybe felt you fully belonged. And I'm curious if that was a case for you, because I know for me on my journey, it's been one of my biggest things of feeling like, oh, I belong to this community. They can meet me. They like have the same language. They have the like similar interests where I can talk about all this nerdy stuff with and have these deep conversations, which excite me. But that's been one of the biggest struggles to actually find that. And I'm curious if that was something you navigated along the way to really get to where you are.
I definitely have felt like, I guess I run a good outsider script. That's one of the things that I think, if I look back over the course of my life, like I think there is a very strong outsider script that has ran for me. So in some respects, like I actually had someone reframe, I wish I could credit the person that reframed that for me, but it's just that idea about how much time a lot of people spend having to cultivate outside. It's like, because they're so integrated and they're so used to being accepted in their belongingness and having a place, that they often can't move or can't exercise their sovereignty because they're so integrated in whatever network that they're involved in. So they have to cultivate the outsider. So they're like, oh, you're one step ahead because you've always had that script. But I'm like, yeah, okay, but I just don't really have the other one as much. Like I can perform the other one. I think I have learned enough cues and signals to perform that quite well. However, I feel like I've learned that I'm definitely like a one-person person. I love one-on-one interactions. That's kind of where I thrive, like where we can get into the weeds and we can get into deep conversations. Like that is my happy place. So as a result, I don't necessarily feel like I've ever had a community per se. However, there is a part of me that does long for that. And I think that is that kind of almost like tribal belonging, like tell me that I'm not alone piece. However, I'm really fortunate in that I have cultivated a lot of good one-on-one, like let's hang out. And then from that place kind of have these like mishmash, odd pod kind of group of humans that I can kind of fully be myself with all one-on-one, but they kind of mash into a group. But I wouldn't call that a community because it's not like how I would look at conventional representation of community. It's just like, what do you do? It's just like, oh, I work in sales. What do you do? I'm in disability support. What do you do? I'm a coach. So what do you guys have in common? Jess, like,
Yeah.
just like, oh yeah, like, so that has been a thing because I'm just like, it's weird to me that I've never had a community. But then when I think about how I relate, like, I've always been a one-to-one human.
Yeah, I feel that in myself. I think there's such beauty for me. I prefer conversation where there's a depth to it and I can be really present with what someone's saying and allow the curiosity to be like, oh, tell me more about that, instead of another person jumping in. Like there's a beauty that can occur in like singular conversation that I find can't be met when there's more people. And for me, I feel a similar thing. Like one of my deepest longings is to meet in the depth of experience within community, whether that's medicine, whether it's extreme experiences like a sweat lodge or something where it's outside the norm and pushes us to our extreme. But for me, that where I'm so open, where I'm so vulnerable, like ritual ceremony, like they're the places I love to meet people, not necessarily because they're talking or anything, but it's where I come fully alive. And to be seen in that is one of my deepest desires. And it's like, oh, I love that space, but it's not always feel like community. It's a weird mishmash of, oh, you want to do this? You want to come in? Like, oh, okay. Let's get together and be weird. And like not necessarily a community that always comes together, but when it does, there's a beauty and a potency and a depth that can be hard to meet in the settings that come together often, I find. Like I think of it in my soul tribe and the people maybe I see once a year, but when I see them, it's like, wow, I've missed you. And I love that feeling.
Yes, same. Like I feel that, and I can definitely resonate because even as you were speaking, like I can really see myself in what you were saying. Like I feel like those, like I love Contact Temple and things like that. However, I think if it was the same people week in, week out, I think I would start to feel funny. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it almost has to be the intention or the vibe through which we're all kind of crystallized and pulled together into the vortex of what it is that we're here to experience, as opposed to we all go because we all like each other and we just hang out. Like I don't know whether or not how I would cope with that over a period of time. Like I feel like it would almost feel a little bit too like, oh, now you need me to be this way. Yeah. As opposed to, oh no, we're here for this purpose and we can jive with that and we can hold each other in that space of liminal identity, as opposed to no, you're this person.
I think it's one of the most important things I've learned is I don't need other people to do everything I do or have the same connection with every person and know how to get different needs met by different people. So right now there's a need of mine getting met in this conversation for depth, for intimacy, for connection, and I find that so beautiful. There's other connections with men that are more physical, but maybe there's the lack of intimacy that I desire, and maybe them men don't meet me there, and that's okay. But there's other men that do. And to know that, oh, we don't like that. That's for me when codependency forms is I need this from you. Otherwise I can't feel full. And to be like, oh, okay, you meet me there. That's okay. That's our relationship. And to acknowledge that and have the depth or the intimacy or whatever else the desire is from other relationships and allowing that to form and crystallize, like you're saying, of we come together for contact dance. We come together for a podcast. We come together to explore ritual, whatever it is, but to have the people that feel right for that and to be met in that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such it's almost like a Disney version of reality. That's like this one person that's going to be all the things for you. It's just like, how much pressure is that on your relationship?
Yeah, let's go into the intimate relationship and you're my everything. I need you for everything. You've got to come with me everywhere. No.
So one of my best friends, we've been mates since we're like 15, 16. And him and I always talked about the fact that him and I could never be in a relationship because we're too similar. We would drive each other mental. So we have like periodic conversations, maybe once every quarter. We just, download, then it'll be like a 4-hour phone conversation because he lives over west. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, again, probably the only person that I know that has a pretty strong Venn diagram of intersecting interests. But even then there is like things that exist out of each other's paradigm, which is actually usually what we talk about.
Yeah.
It's like, we might talk about all the things we have in common, but where it gets interesting is all the stuff that we don't have in common.
Like, I feel like you're like me in that way, that you love to learn. You're curious. And if someone's only interested in what I'm interested in, I get to explore my models of the world and reality with them. Yet when there's someone maybe I disagree with, or maybe someone who has a different model of the world, and I can get curious about that. Oh, you believe that? Oh, okay, they exist in that model. I don't understand this. Now that gets exciting for me, because then there's so much potential for me to open to change my beliefs, and that is one of the greatest gifts we can give to this world.
Oh, absolutely. I put a post up yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. I said, if you haven't had the experience where you've generally gone, wow, or yeah, but today, like if you haven't had that experience, you're not challenging yourself. Because those are the moments when you are being stretched, when you are being challenged, when you are being exposed to things outside of your comfort zone.
So I'm curious about this, because are you familiar with Eric Godsey?
No.
One of my man crushes. Like, honestly, he writes and he's a little mystic in a weird way, but he talks about this concept of steel man and strong man. And so strong man, and you see on Facebook and people are arguing and they're like, I'm right. And there's this real righteous energy of wanting to prove we're better than the other one, or our belief system, our reality is right while the other one's wrong, so we can hold the flag of this is the right way to be. And he speaks of this idea of steel man, and where it's actually about how deeply can we understand the other person's model of the world and like buy into it to actually get to know it, and then from that place decide, oh, is this true for me? Is this right for me? Or is this something I do still disagree with, but not from a place of I'm righteous, but of deep understanding? And I'm curious because there's probably models of the world you operate within that disagree with quite a few others. Just an assumption.
No. Very relatable figure.
And how do you navigate that when people disagree or have different models of the world? And how do you create, is it harmony? Is it a connection? Or is it okay for that disagreement?
That's an awesome question. Like, I'm going to probably have to listen back to this podcast, or maybe just get a notepad and write down some of these names you suggested, because, the ideas you're bringing forward, I've heard of that Acorn one before, but I didn't know who it was, so that was cool. And I like this concept of strong man versus steel man. And I also have a meme coming out on this exact thread. I made it yesterday, so it's funny that, it's in the field.
For those that don't know, every Friday, Jessicka drops some incredible memes, and they've been making me laugh for weeks now, and I'm very much enjoying them.
So again, that was me kind of integrating my lightness, because, as much as I am here to bring through all of the witch and the dark, it's just like I'm also, like, I love comedy. I love having a laugh. So coming back to your point, because that was actually profound and I kind of took it out of there, back into the depths where I belong. It's been interesting for me, because I think if we come back to the analogy of like consciousness being this ray of energy or light, or however you relate to it, it's like this pure beaming ray of light, and consciousness is animating all things. I think my hypothesis is that depending on the frameworks you apply to your experience is how consciousness will represent itself to you. So if you have a specific set of rules for how consciousness shows up, and consciousness being all things, like the external world is essentially just consciousness reflecting back to us. So if you've got a specific set of rules, it's going to abide by that. So depending on your rules is going to be your experience. So if someone has a different set of rules to me, again, my filtering point is this enhancing choice or reducing it? So that for me has been where, like, I can see when people have like I love this term called a belief helmet. It's like the thing that we kind of put over our head to experience reality. Belief helmet. Like, so if someone has a super strong belief helmet around, how things work, and, I'm right and this is the only way, I will listen, but, I'm keeping a wide berth, because like I said to you before, like, everything I'm saying to you is an idea. I don't really have beliefs. I use the word believe because it's sexy. I love the word belief. It's just something about it. However, like, in terms of the things that I believe, like, mostly I have ideas, and that is because I prefer to be flexible, because, hold on to something too tightly, you're probably going to get evidence on the contrary 9 times out of 10 anyway.
Yeah. I love that. And I find myself like, I'll share ideas, I'll share my beliefs or what I use in this reality and what's worked for me. But I always want to invite someone into exploring what's true for them. Because if I'm just projecting all over them my own beliefs and my own story, they haven't had the same experience, and I don't want them to have the same experience. Like I recorded the introduction to this before you came, and one of the things that is really relevant to me is the idea that each of us have a niche in the world where we are meant to belong, like a specific place. It changes and it evolves as it's a living ecosystem of the world. But if a person tries to be me and apply my set of beliefs and rules and conditions that I live in the world, they'll try and take my spot, and that's not theirs. They're meant to be over there being, like, you're meant to be there being Jess. Otherwise this wouldn't work. If I'm just talking to myself, like, what, it's not going to excite me too much. Well, actually, it'd probably excite me a lot. I enjoy myself. I do that at times, but it wouldn't be the same. And I think that acknowledgement that we're all here to be ourselves and find their own rules and their own model of reality that applies to ourselves is so important.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that I often refer to it like a symphony. It's like this idea of consciousness is a symphony, and we're all here to play our unique note, our own unique instrument. So, you know, you and I might both be on violin, but we're going to be playing it differently. We're going to be playing different parts. And if I'm, you know, whipping you every time you're playing your violin, it's like I might have technique pointers for you, just like, hey, have you thought about maybe installing this idea as a concept and playing with this and seeing how it improves your playing? But I'm not here to tell you that's how you should play violin, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Yeah.
I love that you used violin for both of us. Like, I've been talking about learning the violin for the last several months, so this is perfect.
Sophisticated people learn the violin. It's just the thing.
Yeah. Violin under the moonlight. That is my vision. You know, open field, because I'm a romantic as well as a weird magical being.
Of course, you know, that's the thing. Like, I think violin has always been an instrument that's intrigued me. I've loved strings. I play guitar, but violin is one of those ones that, you know, one day in the distant future I will learn.
Like, speaking of this, and for me, the multifaceted ability to be a human. Like, I'm like, oh, I love the violin. I love getting dark and messy and grotesque in the swamp, in the woods, and like building huts and all sorts of things. I did a photo shoot last week where it was very pagan. I was getting my throat slit with a sword. It was beautiful. And all sorts of things. But then I have like that light, playful side as well, where it's like, ooh, I'm like a little boy and I'm curious and I want to see what's out there in the world. And then I can be like really strong and firm in my men's work and all of that. And I think there's often a belief, one that I've experienced myself, is I can't be all of that. I need to fit into a box so other people can like put me there and place me in there and know who I am without all that extra. And for people that might be listening and like going down this journey of, ooh, who am I? What am I? How do they continue down that and allow themselves to be more than just a singular box? How do they allow all of themselves?
Such a good question. I think that was something I was deeply troubled by. I remember as a young person, I used to get annoyed with myself because I always had 2 of everything. I think probably being a Gemini sun, like, you know, there's always 2. Like, I have 2 favorite colors and 2 favorite others. It was like, you know, I would judge myself for that. It's like, that's not okay. You can't have more than 2. Everyone else has one. Pick one. But I'm like, no, I like both equally. So I'd be having this debate in my head about my wrongness for liking more than one thing. So it's been a lifelong journey, literally. And I think it's just that idea of like when you were speaking, the visual that I was getting was like the arcana, like, you know, in the tarot. It's like the 22 trumps. Yeah. We are all of them, you know. So it's that idea of if you are trying to limit yourself to a specific card or a specific archetype or a specific persona, who is it for? I think that's probably the most empowering question, is like, if it's for you, for what purpose? And if it's for someone else, for what purpose? And just exploring that, because why would you want to be one-dimensional? Yeah. Really? You know, because you think about this idea, we've incarnated on this plane for a, you know, finite number of years and a finite amount of time. It's like, why would you just want to play the one note when you've got, you know, according to the tarot, 21 others to play? So, yeah.
I love the simplicity of that, of just being like, is that what you want? Is that who you came here to be? And I know for me, at certain points, I drop into one more deeply. And this isn't to shut down this idea of like, for me, at times I'm like, oh, I need to spend a period of time where I'm more in my warrior, more in my masculine, more in my feminine, whatever it is, to integrate that.
Yes.
And we go through that period of intense study of that, basically. But to get caught in it, and I know where I've done this, where I'm like really into business and I become the businessman and I'm here to do all the business things, and then I forget I'm a little boy as well and I want to play, and my business starts drying up and I'm like, why is this feeling so boring? Why am I not waking up excited? Oh, I haven't allowed the other parts of myself. And notice this with any work, and like if I'm not in my magic, if I'm not doing that alongside my business, like the creativity dries up and I'm like, why am I creating? Oh, I don't know anymore. There's no greater purpose. It's just money. And that's not what I'm here for.
Yep.
And I think that's important to be like, oh, we're all of it.
Definitely. I think that's also where like the utility of thinking about ourselves and our health, not just as in physical health, but overall health, like holistic health. You know, the Ayurvedic chakra system has merit in that respect, because each of those are energy centers. They're minds of their own, and each of those have their own mind and a specific agenda for that needs to be expressed. It's just like, you know, the root, yep, it's all about survival, it's about stability, it's about wealth, you know, but the heart, it's here for connection, it's here for play, it's here for creating order, you know. So it's just like, well, all right, if you're always living in the root, if that's the only mind you're operating from, you know, there's, in this system anyway, 6 other centers or 6 other minds that you're actually not, that are essentially atrophying because you're not allowing them to be in their health, which is in their expression.
Yeah, I love the idea of if you're not using it, it's got to atrophy, and to acknowledge that, because I find that if I'm, for example, if I'm not speaking, I find my voice, it starts to constrict, and I go back to like being scared of my voice, being ashamed of it and things like that. And it's like, oh, I need to make that a regular practice. And this is like, for me, where practice comes in. It's like, no, we don't do this just for like, yes, for the sake of it. Some of it's fun. And also it's a practice to allow more of ourselves to continue to awaken and enliven our being and bring more of ourselves in.
And it's that, you know, circulation of energy, as you're saying, like if you're always operating from the one place, it's just like you're sure that's getting plenty of juice, but it's just like, where are you getting lopsided? It's like, is actually energy flowing? You are allowing it to move through the fullness of yourself. Yeah,
like if we stay in our visionary all along up here in the crown, yeah, we've got awesome ideas. We can see unlimited potential. But how do we actually bring them down into the lower chakras so we can create them? Because what's the point of living in the ethereal? Like, for me, that's the point of this life, is to bring down that into this world and bring it to life, because that's what we are, creators.
Yes. Yeah, that bridge from the ether into the material realm. Yeah.
Oh, that is feeling good. I'm wondering, Jess, is there anything you want to bring to the end of this conversation that feels alive in your being, that's still there?
It's interesting because I've been playing with this idea of how quick and easy it is to descend into performance. It's just like, oh, you know, I want to say something clever, I want to say something profound, I want to say something that allows someone to have a good impression if they're listening. It's just like, oh, okay, and is that true? Is that actually what wants to happen here? And I suppose in that, the invitation is, where are you performing, and is that okay?
I love that invitation into aliveness, into true aliveness. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a delight.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jess. I really appreciate your time, your energy, how you hold yourself in this world, your weird, wonderful witch, and all the things you're bringing to life. If someone wanted to find out about you or find out about your work, where would they go?
Best place to find me would probably be on Instagram. It's that Jessicka Ann with a C and a K and an Ann with an E. Otherwise, yeah, same on most platforms these days, on most of them. Yep.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Jess, for your time here. Thank you all for joining us here on The Weird Way. If you want to find me, connect with me at the Dean Bentley. If you've got questions for me or Jess, send them our way. We would love to hear them, to answer anything, and to share any wisdom that we can, or share a laugh of any of our experiences we shared as well, because there's a lot more and a lot more fun to be had. So thank you all. If you got something out of this, please share, please let me know, comment, and I'd love to hear from you personally. So much love. Take care.